My name is Jason.
And my name is David.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. This is the second in our Dungeon World Basics episodes. Today we are going to be covering combat. Now, we said last time that we were going to be going through the book step by step, but upon further reflection, we feel like maybe that's not the best idea because the next topics after what is Dungeon World are things like hirelings and alignment and other smaller issues that didn't make a lot of sense to be the second episode of the series. Instead, we're going to move over to basic moves. And in particular for this week, we're going to talk about the combat-specific basic moves. After we're done talking about the combat-specific basic moves, we're then going to talk about just combat more generally, tips and tricks for running a combat, managing a combat. We're also going to talk about the infamous 16 hit point dragon, which is I think understanding the 16 hit point dragon is really important to understanding combat in Dungeon World. And then we'll wrap up like we did last time with a little bit of actual play. How's that sound, David?
That sounds good.
All right, well, let's go to the basic moves for combat. Okay, let's start with hack and slash. So a few issues we want to talk about with regards to hack and slash. The first is the trigger. Fictional trigger, when you attack an enemy in melee, it's pretty straightforward, right? It means when you're attacking a prepared enemy, then you roll hack and slash. But there's a really important distinction being made there, right? Between a prepared enemy and an unprepared enemy. If you're attacking an enemy who is asleep, subdued, unaware, just not prepared, then more than likely you're going to just kill it. No roll needed. Another thing about the trigger, if the way you describe your attack could reasonably hit more than one enemy, you get to attack all of the enemies and apply your damage to each enemy. That is something that's very different between Dungeon World and, say, Dungeons & Dragons. Another interesting aspect of the move here is the enemy's attack. So if you get a 7 to 9, you suffer the enemy's attack. If you get a miss, you're very likely going to suffer the enemy's attack, though not always. In many cases, the enemy's attack means the monster, we'll just deal with monsters for the purposes of this episode, the monster is going to deal its damage, right? Whatever's listed in stat block. But it doesn't have to be damage. In fact, you can do, as the GM, you can have the enemy's attack be anything that's listed as a move on the monster stat block, right? And so, for example, the Ghoul has a move that says gnaw off a limb or bite off a limb or something like that. If you have a really punitive, mean-spirited GM, they could, per the rules, take your hand, when they get a chance to make an attack with the Ghoul, as opposed to doing hit point damage. They could just say, I bite your hand off, right? Because that's a move that the Ghoul can do. That's a pretty hard GM move. A lot of GMs would tee it up a little softer first, kind of like Lucero Castafiel's facing right now, right, David?
Right.
Where, the Ghoul is preparing to bite off Lucero's hand right now in the AP, but I'm going to give David a chance to try to prevent that. So, but in any case, it's in the same spirit, right? That is something that the Ghoul can do. And so an enemy's attack doesn't just mean damage, although it often does.
Right. One other thing to note when you are dealing with multiple enemies and a single character, when multiple enemies are dealing damage to a single character, if you do opt for the option of dealing damage, you simply add +1 for each additional creature that is attacking, instead of rolling damage individually.
In fact, you take the highest single amount of damage among them. So like if it's 2 orcs and an ogre, the ogre is bigger and does more damage, so you take his damage, and then you add 1 extra for each of the orcs, right?
Right. This seems like a good time to talk about weapon tags, because there are a number of weapon tags that can be applied to different situations that characters will have on their weapons. Specifically, we should talk about forceful and messy. So these weapon tags are things that either have a very clear description about what they are supposed to do, like a pierce would just ignore one armor, but forceful and messy are a little bit different. They are going to do different things in the fiction and not necessarily mechanically, though it can change the outcome significantly because it is changing the fictional circumstances. So specifically, let's talk about forceful first. Forceful is a tag that lets you justify how your attack is going to knock a monster about or force it to move somewhere where it probably doesn't want to move. This could lead to the death of the enemy if you manage to force it into a hazard or off of a cliff or something like that, without any need to actually do more damage.
Yeah, exactly. And in that way, the forceful tag is pretty powerful.
Absolutely. The second tag that I mentioned was messy. This tag is similarly powerful, as it allows the character to describe how they might dismember an enemy, taking limbs off, or otherwise severely damaging the enemy in a messy way. It's important to note that anything with the forceful and messy tag should be a conversation between the player and the GM so that they're used appropriately and to the maximum extent possible and not going too far.
Well, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about last episode, right? Where I mentioned that in Dungeon World, we privilege the words we're speaking at the table. We privilege the conversation in many ways more than we do numbers and die rolls. Numbers and die rolls are important, but forceful and messy are a great example of that sort of privileging the conversation. Like, that is the power in Dungeon World, right? The way we describe things. And the forceful and messy tags are permission to describe your attacks in that way.
Right. And it's important that in this conversation, you be honest in the fiction with what you could realistically, or as far as your fantasy universe goes, realistically do. For example, if you're playing a more realistic scenario where a man is attacking an elephant, you're probably not going to be able to use the forceful tag to force an elephant several yards back or anything like that. But you could very realistically knock an elephant's rider to the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really key to not just combat, but to all of Dungeon World, right? Being very, very honest about the possibilities is a really big key here, and it goes back to that conversation again, right? It's between the player and the GM to sort of like, through their conversation, adjudicated slightly by the tags and the die rolls, to figure out what is the right fictional result.
Right. And then I think one other tag I want to mention just at the outset is the precise tag, which is spelled out very clearly in the rules, but it's something that is easily overlooked. Unlike forceful and messy, it's not describing how your attack goes exactly. It's more a straight up mechanical thing where you're going to roll with dex instead of with strength when you roll hack and slash.
Yeah, that's an important thing about the tags. In Dungeon World, you get two different types of tags, right? There are the very clearly defined mechanical sort of tags like precise, like, +1 damage, if the weapon is serrated or whatever, right? But then you have tags like forceful and messy, or you can have tags that give like elemental powers to your weapons, right? Like a magic item that has a lightning tag or a fire tag on it. Those tags don't have specific mechanical effects. They are, again, like we've been saying, they are permission to narrate your attack in a certain way.
Right. Absolutely.
So hack and slash, it's a pretty straightforward move. Just kind of take note, just keep in mind some of those things we talked about just now. Let's go take a look at Volley. Okay, so let's talk about Volley. This is a really straightforward move. It's a straightforward move that covers what are called ranged attacks or missile attacks in other games. The 10+ result on Volley needs no explanation. It's really straightforward. Deal your damage. Worth noting, deal your damage to one character. Unlike hack and slash, you can only target one character with Volley, unless you have, I think there's a ranger move called Blot Out the Sun or something.
Yeah, that's right.
That lets you, attack multiple people. The 10+, pretty easy. The 7 to 9 result can be a little trickier, particularly the choice that says you have to move to get the shot, placing you in danger of the GM's choice. This is probably best explained with an example. So here's our setup for this example. The rest of the party is involved in a melee a little further ahead with a bunch of evil humanoids, orcs, goblins, maybe an ogre or two. This battle is taking place near the edge of a cliff. You are using your bow and arrow from near range, meaning close enough to hit them with your bow and arrow, but not quite within arm's reach of the evil humanoids. You get a 7 to 9, and you choose you have to move to get the shot, putting yourself in danger. David, what are some possible ways this might shake out? Like, as a GM, what might you do?
Well, there's lots of options that you could have here. The GM might explain that you get the shot off, and then you had to move a little bit closer to one of the ogres, who has longer arms and a long weapon and can now attack you. Depending on how this is narrated by the GM, your actions might trigger another move, like a Defy Danger, to avoid getting hit by that club. Another way this might go, you might get your shot off, but you had to take a funny angle which puts you near the cliff's edge. An orc is now barreling towards you, aiming to push you off. Another way this could go is you get your shot off, but you had to take a funny angle which put you near the cliff's edge, and your sadistic GM explains that you lost your footing and are now hanging off the side. That's pretty punitive.
It is pretty punitive, yeah. It's super punitive. But it's totally legit, right? It's totally within the realm of possibility. You know, so yeah, that particular choice is a trickier one. It's fun though, but the key there is just to think about the full context of what's happening in the fight, and then put them in danger if they choose that.
Right.
Another issue associated with the volley move is ammo, and I think it's something that needs to be explained. What is ammo? David, what is ammo in Dungeon World?
Right. So this is another option that you might choose on the 7 and 9 result, is that you will lose an ammo. And ammo is really an abstraction of whatever your ammunition is for your particular weapon. So while we're never going to talk about how many arrows you keep in your quiver as a mechanical thing, typically you're only going to have just a few ammo. But the ammo only goes away when you choose this option, or if you have another move that requires you to use ammo.
Right. In Dungeon World, unlike in, say, Dungeons and Dragons, we don't track every arrow. We don't track every bolt. And we don't concern ourselves with, like, making sure we tell the GM at the end of the fight, oh, I go and collect all my arrows. You know, I remember playing AD&D 2E back in the day, and I think you had to roll for every arrow that was shot. You rolled a D100, and it was a 50% chance of your arrow not breaking. Right. So, and if you didn't go say, I'm going to go collect all the arrows, then you were just out those arrows. Dungeon World cares nothing for this. Dungeon World assumes that you are always using as many arrows as needed to get the hit and collecting them after the fight. Okay. Like David said, the 3 ammo, usually 3, the 3 ammo slots just reflect, an abstraction of, like, you know, kind of how close you're getting to being empty, right? And as soon as you mark off the last ammo box, you had to use your last arrow to get that shot.
Right. Another thing to note, weapons that you could use for ranged attacks, such as a throwing dagger or something like that, or some other kind of improvised weapon that you could throw. There is no ammo. You threw it, it's gone. You cannot choose this option on a 7 and 9.
Right, exactly. Is there anything else we want to say about Volley before we move on?
I don't think there's anything else.
All right, the last combat-specific basic move is Defend. Now, before we talk about Defend, listeners, you may be wondering why we're not talking about Defy Danger, which is a move that gets used a lot in combat. Defy Danger is a pretty big move. It's a big, important move, and it's not exclusive to combat. And so we're actually going to save that for the next episode. But just know that Defy Danger does happen a lot in combat as well. We're going to talk about Defend, though. It's a really straightforward move in terms of, like, what it does. It's got very easy, simple to understand outcomes, right? Just a couple of little issues to be aware of, especially for people who are brand new to Dungeon World. One of the things you get when you roll this move is hold. So you roll it and you get X number of hold if you're successful. You spend it to do the various things. The question is, like, when can you spend hold? What is hold even, right? There's nothing like this in D&D that I'm aware of. In Dungeon World, hold is just a currency. It's just a thing that you note somewhere on your paper and you spend it to do a certain thing. And for the defend move, the hold is spent to do the very specific defend actions. But sometimes with other moves in the game or with custom moves the GM makes, they might say that you have hold that you can spend to do X, Y, or Z, right? It's just a way of keeping track of how many times you can do a thing.
Right.
let's just take a look at some other aspects of the defend move here. One of the options is you can have the attack's effect or damage. The damage part's easy, right? If the ogre did 12 points of damage to you or to the person that you're defending, you can spend that and it does 6 points instead. No problem. But what about the effect? That's a different one. As we mentioned during Hack and Slash, monsters don't always simply do damage. Sometimes they do other things, right? And in that case, you have to use a bit of good judgment and kind of go with whatever makes sense in the fiction. So if the monster's attack is that they slice off the arm of your companion, perhaps when you spend the hold, they don't slice it completely, right? Maybe they just cut through some muscle tissue and crack some bone, right? But the arm is still intact. If the monster's attack causes them to knock your comrade who you are defending off a cliff into a free fall, maybe you spend the defend to break their momentum, and instead they just knock your comrade off to where they're hanging off the side, right? Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just again, it's a little bit like the troubled positioning 7-9 choice on Volley, right? You have to use some judgment. You got to pay attention to what's going on in the fiction. And I guess the last issue with defend is when do you roll it, right? Like, when does it fire off? This could be a really hard thing. This is a hard thing for very seasoned Dungeon World people, right? We're going to talk about that in the next segment. So let's go take a look at that. Okay, listeners, now we want to talk about just some sort of side issues, some related issues as far as combat goes. Importantly, sort of managing a combat in Dungeon World, because it's pretty different than D&D. So the biggest difference that you're going to notice right away if you're coming from D&D is there is no turn order. Okay, so in D&D, everybody rolls initiative, the monsters roll initiative, and then you have a turn order to determine like who goes when. There's nothing like that in Dungeon World. It is the single trickiest thing to wrap your head around if you're coming from D&D to Dungeon World, is the fact that there is no turn order. But we're going to try to demystify it a little bit here. The first thing to know is that the monsters don't, quote, get a turn in Dungeon World, okay? In Dungeon World, a hack and slash roll is meant to represent a series of strikes, counter-strikes, feints, parries, etc. between the player character and the monster. If you get a 7-9, or if you get a miss, it means the monster got some licks in on you or got the best of you during that particular exchange. So the hack and slash roll covers a lot of fiction, right? Something that might have been, 5-6 die rolls between the monster and the player character in D&D takes place in one single roll in hack and slash, right? So, David, what's the best way to approach sort of managing players' turns then, since the monsters don't really get a turn?
Right. So we talked about last time on the first episode of Basics how the GM is really facilitating a conversation by asking questions. And the best way to initiate combat without having any kind of initiative or turns for the monsters is to go around the table at the outset of combat and ask each player what their character is doing one at a time before going to dice it all, so that you know the landscape of the combat, who's trying to take care of what in that initial going into combat, because the players are probably going to have a plan about who's going to try and do what. And then you go to dice one at a time. And as these results start coming out, other players may need to respond in a different way than they planned to initially. And then you can change the spotlight to them and ask them, you just saw this bad thing happen to your friend. What are you going to do? And then they can either go on with the plan they initially had or change their mind and try and react dynamically.
That's exactly right. Yeah, just go around the table, ask everybody, and kind of kick off with the one that makes the most sense, right? That's what I usually do. If you have a person who's firing arrows while the rest of them are running into the melee with the monsters, go ahead and let them fire their arrows off, right? Like, it makes the most sense for them to be able to go first. If you have someone who's describing what is a defend move, this is going back to the defend thing that we teased earlier. If someone describes what they want to do as being a defend action, you should let them go ahead and roll the defend move. Let them go first, right? Because defend is best first, right? Because all of its options affect everybody else in the combat.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great way of handling it. And That's not actually like in the Dungeon World book anywhere, as best I can recall. But that's just comes from David and I playing a lot of Dungeon World, right? The best way to do it is to just go around the table, ask everybody, and then fire off in the order that makes sense. And like David said, it'll change in the middle, but at least to kind of get you going. One thing I wanted to point out is that another kind of like thing about managing combat in DW versus, say, D&D is sometimes a character gets to go 2, maybe even 3 die rolls before the next person gets to go, right? Because it might make sense for them to do multiple die rolls in quick succession. For example, if they narrate running across a narrow beam quickly that's suspended above a chasm in order to get to the melee on the other side, and then they dive into the melee and attack, you're going to probably have them roll Defy Danger with Dexterity to safely get across the beam, and then immediately roll Hack and Slash right after. So, turn order. There's no such thing, except there kind of is. Go with what makes sense, based off what's happening in the fiction.
Yeah, go with what makes sense, and then as a GM, manage the spotlight and let each player have their fun.
Yep, absolutely. Just honestly, it's pretty instinctual, right? I mean, that's what I found. What do you think, David?
I would agree.
Yeah, just trust your gut. You'll be fine. Let's talk about range.
Yeah, so this kind of is another portion of that tag discussion we had earlier. Another aspect of tags is there are range tags. Dungeon World has 5. Hand, close, reach, near, and far. Hand is the closest and far is the furthest away. So in practice, where do you see these really coming into play?
I mean, in practice, you don't really dwell on them much, I've found. You know, if it makes sense that you'd be able to hit the enemy with your weapon, given the fictional circumstances, then you just do. You don't really like look at the tag and consider that, right? It's not like, you know, we're not measuring squares or anything, right? We're not even really, I mean, occasionally you might say, oh, are they close enough for me to shoot with my bow and arrow? And maybe you then, you know, make a call or whatever based off whatever range tag their bow has. But for the most part, if it makes sense, it makes sense. The time when the range tags are most important is when you have 2 people who are kind of unevenly matched, right? So for example, if you are a fighter who has a sword that has like, I don't know, like say a hand or close range, and you're facing an ogre who's already bigger than you are with a greater arm length, and they have a long club, so they've got a lot of reach on you. At that point, you want to look at the tags. You know, if you have a hand or close range sword, you might have to defy danger to get inside the ogre's club swing, right? To get close enough to hit him. But if you have a spear that has the next highest one, which I think is reach, if you have a spear with the reach tag, maybe you don't have to do that, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it might be helpful to note, like, hand, close, and reach are typically your melee weapons, and then near and far are your ranged weapons.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they mean what they sound like. And as far as the difference between near and far, as a rule of thumb, I would say near is probably anything where you could run up to them and fight them, and far is anything where you probably couldn't do that.
Right, exactly. Another thing I wanted to point out as far as like managing a combat is attacking multiple enemies. We actually jumped the gun on it a little bit and talked about it already, but I just want to restate it again. In Dungeon World, if the player describes their attack in such a way that they could damage more than one enemy around them, say they're surrounded by 3 orcs, then you get to do that. If you hit, you get to apply your damage to all of them. In turn, you get hit by all of them, equal to the highest damage among them, plus 1 for each additional enemy, right? So, for example, if you're fighting an Orc Breaker and 2 Orc Blood Warriors, the Orc Breaker does, well, you would take, on a hit from them, on a hit point damage attack from them, you would take a d10 plus 5. The Orc Breaker does a d10 plus 3, and then you take plus 1, 1 for each of the other 2 orcs. So, d10 plus 5. Since many Dungeon World characters are around 16 hit points, you can see how quickly or how deadly the situation becomes and how fast it becomes deadly, you know?
And you can also see how that defend move, where you can have the damage, would be very important for somebody to say, you know, I step in the way or something to trigger it.
One thing we should point out, just to be perfectly clear here, As far as attacking multiple enemies goes, and we said it earlier, but just to reemphasize, does not count for volley. Volley, you can only ever shoot one enemy unless you have a move that says otherwise. The last thing I want to talk about as far as sort of general combat talk in Dungeon World is what actually counts as combat, right?
Right, because there are some situations where it's not the kind of place where you could stand your ground and fight.
Exactly. We've already talked about the instance where an enemy is helpless, right? That's not a combat. That's just you killing the enemy, right? But here's another interesting case too. What about the case when you are facing so many enemies that there's no way you could actually kill them all in melee, right? For example, a huge swarm of dozens of goblins. That's something different, right, David?
Yeah, I mean, that's not something that you can just stand your ground and try and take them one-on-one or even two at a time or three at a time. There's too many. So if your characters or your players decide that their characters are going to try and stand their ground, then that's going to lead to what we call a golden opportunity for the GM. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a GM-specific episode, but just mention it here.
Yeah, it means basically they're fucked. So if they choose to do something stupid like that, you get to inflict maximum pain on them as the GM, right? What's really likely going to happen here is instead of the characters doing hack and slash on all of these goblins, instead what they're going to be doing is trying to escape via probably defy danger or some other appropriate playbook move, right? Even though on screen, the characters might be swinging their swords, hacking down and slashing goblins, it's not the hack and slash move. What they're really doing is they're defying danger. They're trying to escape, right? They're not doing the sword strikes in order to whittle down all the goblins to zero, right?
Right. And I think that's something where it's something the GM should be very clear about. If they say they're going to try and stand their ground and fight, say this is not the kind of situation where you could stand your ground and kill all of these. There are too many. But if you're killing them to get away, then trigger X move.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And again, once you've explained that to them, if they still insist on trying to fight all the goblins, then yeah, hit them hard. In fact, they're probably going straight to the Black Gate, right?
That's a good chance.
The last thing we want to talk about this episode, listeners, is the 16 hit point dragon. This is a infamous thing about Dungeon World, the 16 hit point dragon. Many people flip through the Dungeon World book. They see that and it blows their minds and they don't know what this is all about. A dragon with 16 hit points? What? A halfling thief has 16 hit points. Are we suggesting that a halfling thief and a dragon are equally tough and equally hardy?
No,
we're not. We are definitely not. So, while it's true that a dragon in Dungeon World has 16 hit points, the question that you want to ask yourself, the thing we're concerned about here with is, can you even hit the dragon in the first place?
So, going back to the conversation we just had, where you're inviting a golden opportunity by trying to fight off the countless horde of goblins. If you run straight at a dragon with not but a sword, that could very well be a golden opportunity and not a hack and slash.
Right. I would hope that the dragon would torch your ass with powerful breath weapon and burn you down to a crisp, right? The key here is, yes, the dragon has 16 hit points, but the dragon also has a terrible breath weapon. He has a whip-like tail and long claws. You have to get past these things just to even get close enough to the dragon to even have a chance to hit the dragon. Any of those things, getting past the claws, getting past the fire, those could be defy danger rolls, depending on the fiction. Like if it's a really big breath weapon that you couldn't possibly roll away from, maybe it's just an automatic hit. Who knows? Once you get close enough, your little tiny sword might not even make a difference against the dragon's, hard as steel scales, right? You might have to try to find a weakness on the dragon, in which case maybe that triggers discern realities or something else.
Right. Or you need to come up with a much better plan about how you're going to do this. Maybe
Right.
if you've got a weapon tag that says elemental damage lightning or something like that.
Or dragon slaying.
Or dragon slaying, if your GM has been that on the nose and straightforward with you.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing though, right? Like, I mean, you can imagine a situation where maybe there's a quest item that's necessary to hit the dragon, right? Your GM should be thinking about things. And that's the key here for the GMs listening. You know your dragon's only got 16 hit points. Don't let the players get a hit that easy, right? Like, make them work for it. Make it hard. Make it ferocious. Imagine this. What if the fight is taking place in a heavily populated area and the dragon's going crazy? The dragon's going apeshit. He's burning everything around him, right? Suddenly you have burning, collapsing buildings to deal with. You have civilians running around like crazy, maybe going to stampede the party members, right? That's just a different kind of danger that the dragon presents, but it is nevertheless a serious danger, right? It's something the characters have to cope with before they even have a chance of dealing with the dragon.
Yeah. Just because somebody runs at an enemy and says they swing their sword, I think that's the big takeaway here, is that does not mean that they are getting to trigger hack and slash necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I could keep going with examples. The dragon has a move called Bend an Element to Its Will. So maybe that aforementioned dragon burning down the city, maybe they use that move, their power over elemental fire, to create a big fucking fire cyclone that just engulfs everything, in a 50-foot radius or something, right? Maybe it's a sort of water-based dragon and they summon a tsunami. Maybe it's a forest-based dragon and they crack open the earth and send the party tumbling down the crevasse. I mean, you can imagine all kinds of things. What we're getting at here, and just to restate what David's point was earlier, monsters in Dungeon World are more than just what's written on the page. They are more than just their stats, right? That's really important. This includes all monsters, right? Big to small. A goblin with a dagger in the right fictional circumstances is just as deadly as a dragon.
It can be if it's sneaking into the camp and it's going to stab somebody in their sleep.
Precisely. Just, it's, to my mind, unlocking the idea of the 16 hit point dragon is the key to understanding the ebb and flow of Dungeon World combat, right? It's the key to, once you kind of like grok it, once you think about it and really consider it, all the different angles, it's kind of how you understand how combat works and how the role of fiction works in arbitrating the combat, right? And sort of deciding what happens, what moves fire off, what's going on, right? There's a really great article called The 16 Hit Point Dragon that we're going to link to in the show notes. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a great read.
And truly, truly, fiction comes first. So consider what you are telling your players and be mindful that you tell them enough so that they know the dangers, and don't be afraid to step out of the character's eyes and tell them meta. If you try and do that, it will not work. You need to figure out another way, a better way, a smarter way.
We privilege the words we speak at the table. Hi listeners, I want to tell you about the newest issue of Codex, Codex Love 2. It's a sequel to the original Codex Love, and it has a lot of really fantastic features, including The Final Girl, a game of love, a hack of the classic horror movie game The Final Girl, but for reality dating shows like The Bachelor and Flavor of Love. And Then They Met, an original 2-player story game about a couple destined to fall in love, but that takes place entirely in the weeks and days leading up to the first time they lay eyes on each other. Willow Bluff, a queer-themed town for the classic game Dogs in the Vineyard. The newest Gauntlet Daddy, Sir Barrick, and his lovely companion, Gwyn. 3 dozen men who need to be rescued. 7 original illustrations. And a custom layout by Ollie Jeffrey, whose work was recently seen in the smash hit Legacy 2E. To get Codex Love 2, just make a $4 or higher pledge on the Gauntlet Patreon by April 30th. That's at patreon.com/Gauntlet. And don't forget, Codex back issues are now available on Drive-Thru RPG. Thanks. Okay, we're going to do a little bit more actual play, continuing our tale of Lucero Castafiel. A couple of things I want to point out, listeners, that came up in comments on the last episode, and I want to address them here. Lucero's backstory that we gave last time was pretty rich and complex in some ways, or at least was a little more detailed than like a sort of just starting off Dungeon World character would be. There's a reason for that. The Castafiel story has been taking place in other episodes of Discern Realities, and so our longtime listeners know all of that history, right? So we were just kind of recapping it for them. This character, his family, this is not their first time at the rodeo. We've seen them before, so that's where that came from. Another thing to point out is that these actual play segments are not always going to map to what we just talked about, right? For example, when we talk about hirelings, that's probably not going to come up in the actual play, right? We talk about wizard spells. Well, Lucero is not a wizard, so that's probably not going to come up in the actual play. But combat is going to come up, so strap in. Let's do it. So Lucero, when we last saw you, you were heading down a catacomb, or a passage in the catacombs beneath the Temple of the Peerless Star, and you encountered a sort of ghoul-like creature that had scrambled out of a little grate in a crawl space in the wall. And you attempted to wrap him up with your chain, the chain of your weapon, Bloodless, which is a sort of scythe and spike connected by a chain, right? That didn't go so well. The creature jumped on you, and I mentioned that he was scissoring into your glove and wrist. You're about to lose your hand, Lucero. What do?
I'm going to take that scythe end of it and try and get it around its neck. And if I can't lop its head off, I'm at least going to try and leverage it away from my hand.
Are you prioritizing getting the creature off your hand or killing it?
I'm prioritizing getting it off my hand, but my weapon does have the forceful tag.
Oh, okay. So if you do hack and slash and that's good. Go ahead and just roll it.
Okay. I got a 10.
Nice. How much damage do you do?
Let's see. My damage die is a D10, I think. So I'm going to do 5 damage, and I'm going to use that forceful tag to get it away from my hand.
5 is not quite enough to kill it. So yeah, go ahead and just describe what happens here.
Okay. So it's on my arm. It's on, I guess, my left arm, and it's trying to bite away and scissor at my wrist. And I get that scythe up around its neck, and I bite it deep into its sternum, and then I wrench it away with my strong right arm so that it falls backwards away from me, and I can scramble to my feet before it can get up on me again.
Oh, nice. The scythe is like kind of heavy, right? Is that kind of what's going on here? Like it's kind of you get like a lot of push, a lot of leverage with it. Is that the idea?
Right. Plus it's attached to the end of this chain. So after I can even throw it even harder and then tug it back towards me so that way it doesn't get away from me, but I can throw it harder than I normally could.
Yeah. Well, at this point, it's good enough to knock him off. So let's say you get to your feet. The thing is there. It's hunched down. It's a little injured, but it's still, I don't know. It's still just like kind of snapping and hissing and kind of springing back, or like kind of drawing back like it's going to spring forward. What do?
I'm going to try and throw the spike end of it into its forehead.
Nice. Roll volley.
All right. I got a 7.
Awesome. Which choice do you make?
Well, I can't choose ammo, so we'll just get put in a more dangerous spot, I guess.
Okay.
I have to move to get the shot.
Yeah. I think I'm going to... So it's a pretty narrow passageway, as we've described, and you can really only move forward and backward, right? What I think we might say instead is you have to... I'm going to interpret you have to move to get the shot to mean you have to let go of the chain to get the shot, or you can't quite pull the chain back, right? You have to you have to heave it so that the chain is out of your hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In order to throw it far enough to hit him. So we'll go with that. How much damage did you do, though?
1.
That is actually enough. So go ahead and describe killing it.
Yeah, so I'd let go of Bloodless, the entire weapon, throwing the spike end towards it, and it takes the creature right in its forehead, and since the whole weight of the weapon is going with it, it drags it like several feet down the passageway before it dies.
Nice, nice. And you can imagine a situation where if there had been more of these ghouls, you not having your weapon in your hand would have been a big problem, right?
Right.
Fortunately, You're very lucky, Lucero Castafiel. So, what do you do?
I go and unbury the spike end from this nasty ghoul creature's head. And I'm kind of going to give it a look over. Like, it's really strange that there would be a ghoul down here. This is a temple, and you usually don't just keep ghouls in the basement of the temple. Does it look like it was once a monk or anything like that?
Go ahead and roll Discern Realities. Let's see.
I got an 8, so one question.
Yeah.
What here is not what it appears to be?
You have deduced it fairly correctly. I mentioned that the creature has like kind of slack, rubbery skin, right? And it has like folds of skin at the back of its head and neck that if you just glance at it, just looks like folds of skin. But upon closer examination, you realize that some of the folds aren't folds at all. They are in fact tattoos. There's a tattoo on the back of the creature's head that appears to be in a sort of star-like shape.
Interesting.
What do you do?
Well, retrieve my torch and continue down this passageway. I gotta figure out what happened to my sister before something stranger happens.
Awesome. I think we'll leave it there for now.
Sounds good.
Well, listeners, that's our show. We hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to get in touch with us, I recommend going to Twitter and following us at Gauntlet RPG. We are also on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for the Gauntlet. We are there. We are also on Patreon at patreon.com/Gauntlet. David, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, listeners. Take care.